everybody in YouTube land and everyone watching live on Twitch. I am here for a town hall style discussion video. I've done these a few times talking about the mechanics of Scarlet Keys and Edge of the Earth. And we're here now talking about investigator deck building as today's focus in this video. If you're watching this on YouTube, feel free to throw your thoughts in the video comments as well. I would love to read them. But today we are talking about just as a whole, what makes a good investigator deck building? How do we feel about investigator deck building? Do we want to see more variety in deck building? Do we want to see less variety in deck building? The whole thing today is just all about deck building and how we can make that be the best thing it can be. Benj Bellegar, thank you so much for 4 months of the Golden Table with your Twitch Prime. Much appreciated. So I have them kind of laid out in general release order, and something that I actually found, someone said this pretty recently that I think might actually be true. There's no way to know for sure, but they said that they had a theory that the 5 Dunwich investigators were actually originally the core set investigators because they were all designed at the same time, but then they felt as though that, you know, they wanted a bit more excitement in the core box and they switched it. I don't necessarily think this is actually accurate and true, but if we look at it, the Dunwich deck builders, I think, have very simple deck building, right? They all have the same thing where it's their class, 0 to 5, and up to 5 other level 0 cards from other classes. So Seeker, Mystic, Seeker, Rogue, Mystic, and Survivor. I imagine that also changed when they saw that maybe that there was less to it, because in a limited collection, I think that like these are a little bit tighter as they are. I wanted to start here with these investigators, because the big thing for me with them is I feel like at this point now, their deck building is pretty boring, right? Like, who is excited about Dunwich investigators? Not me, right? Like, I'm not like that interested in building this style of deck anymore, you know? Like, I'd rather have mono class, just because, like, I don't know, the abilities are usually stronger for the most part. Rex, and even like, I mean, mostly just Rex notwithstanding, the abilities are generally balanced better to be it. So like, I feel like most of these investigators are kind of like left in the dust. I do think 10 would be too good. I think we once talked about previously in a video as like 8 could be interesting to see, but at the same time, I agree with the general sentiment that they're probably fine, and this is kind of just like one of those things that is a little bit of like, if I could have my way, I would do it, but I am okay that it's not that way, right? I do agree that it is a little fun that they get something every expansion, right? Like, I agree with that 100%. They just get something new to play with every time that something was released. And they get to do, like, I know you're going to say, but Justin, that works for every investigator. Like, every set, Roland gets new Guardian cards. And yes, that's true, but it's different because these guys can touch into anything at level 0, which means that anything is kind of available for them to actually play with. However, with new expansions, level 0 cards are getting more impactful, and therefore they're slowly getting better over time, right? Yes and no. Yes and no, because if you think about it, let's just say, for example, you're playing like a Zoe deck, and there are like 10 banger level 0 cards and other classes that you can do. She only gets to access 5 of those 10 cards, right? But what if, like, for example, Roland, or sorry, like Daisy or Agnes or Wendy or Skids gets to access all 10 of them? When in terms of it comes to how the power level increases, they kind of just stay pretty flat, right? Because, like, they only get 5 cards, only at level 0, and it's one of those things that they don't really get to, like, you know, like, even just the slight difference between, like, an investigator like Mark Harrigan, who also has a pretty restrictive deck building option, but it's actually somehow seemingly more open-ended than the Dunwich investigators, right? Like, how many times do we see a new tactic come out and we're like, this is Banger and Mark? And the answer is most of the time, right? And then, like, that's not so much for, like, the other people. We look at, like, Zoe, and she's like, she got a huge boost from the Ancestral token, which I really like doing in here. I really like being able to show you guys the cards, because one of the biggest complaints people say is, like, we don't know the cards you're saying when you say the name. And generally I say you should just have Arkham DB open and you should be, like, looking at cards too, but I can do it on Tabletop Simulator really nice. It's one of those things that this works really well for Zoe, but at the same time, like, she already could also play it, right? And then, like, every other boom, 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 right? Not me, not you, you're different. Boom, like, boom. They all also get that same bonus. So it's like one of those things where I feel like, for me with the Dunwich investigators, they haven't seen that same sort of boost. Again, Rex is kind of the anomaly to this. I know that there are people out there who don't think Rex is as strong as we do at playing board games, but I honestly think they're crazy. Because I just played Rex in 2 campaigns and he won them for me. Like, he was the reason we won. And they were both limited set collections. Like, I haven't actually built a free-for-all Rex in forever. And all my Rex play has been a sealed deck, a limited collection with all 18 decks built with 1 collection, and then the nearest neighbor, and Rex has slaughtered, like, each of them, right? It's just like, he is, I think, that strong. We're not talking about that, though, today. But he feels it the least because his ability on the front half is really good. Like, the big thing about Jenny, we should talk Jenny a lot, right? But the thing about Jenny's issue is that she kind of just, I think, also hasn't really scaled with the game, right? Like, she hasn't really scaled in that way on the front half. And also, you feel it more because of the back half. Don't get me started on Jim Culver, right? Like, you look at Mark. Mark has a very good ability, very limited deck building, but his deck building is more open-ended than the Dunwich investigators, really, in the long term, right? Yeah, I think, like, 8, even 7, having, like, 2 more of your deck, right? 2 more cards. I do like that it's, like, also an odd number. Yeah, and it's like one of those things that it's just like, I feel like it's kind of a shame because you see other investigators. Like, this is a good time to even talk about, like, the core set investigators. We can kind of transition over here and start talking about them, right? What's really awesome about the best part about the 05-02 deck building is that it's open, right? So you get so much more, and you get to also explore it in very unique ways. And this is actually one of the things that people wanted me to talk about in this was, should they repeat deck building? And the answer to that is, I think they already have, but they're doing it in the wrong way. I feel like we've already started to see repeat deck buildings, but they've done it in a much more narrow way that I think, unfortunately, is less exciting. There is a game that we talk about on this channel as a good example of how to do things, and that is Magic the Gathering, right? And And the reason we talk about Magic the Gathering, or like as like kind of like a design example, is because it's been in the business for what, 30 years now, right? Like it's like as its 30th, it's like in its 30th year of production or something like that, or it's like almost at its 30th year. That's a really long time to be in production for a game. The longest running card game, I think. Like, yeah, I think, as far as I'm aware. So they've done a lot of things right, they've done a lot of things wrong, and they've done a lot of things right, but there's a lot to kind of discover and learn from it. And you see that in, like, the class system is like the color pie in Magic the Gathering. And there is the color pie here in Arkham Horror, the card game, right? Where you can look at each class and you kind of know what they do, right? Guardians, they're good at fighting, they're good at protecting their teammates, they're good at support. Seeker, they're good at drawing cards. Asterisk, that's a problem. And they're also good at like getting clues, right? Rogues, they are good with their foot, they're good at evading, and they're good with money, and they like cheating the system and cheating the game. Mystics use their brain for everything, and they use magic. And survivors are there too. No, survivors are scrappy, they use all of their stats, and they care about failing. That's like, they're not really like concerned if that happens to them. And that's kind of like the class identity that you can put in all these boxes in. And having those restrictions of the color pie in and of itself provides interest in the game, right? And how you could design investigators. And in Magic the Gathering, they have a format that's wildly popular called Commander, where you can choose a legendary creature to play, and that creature is your commander, and their color identity, so their color pie, determines what you can put into their deck. That is actually incredibly similar to how investigators in this game work, where like this is your deck building options is essentially your color identity. It shows you what you can mechanically touch into in order to play and win the game in Arkham. With that said, Magic the Gathering repeats and explores its commanders' identities and like what they do mechanically very similarly to one another quite often. And Magic the Gathering releases a lot more cards than Arkham Horror the card game. Like I was saying a lot before this, we have a lot of investigators. Like there are a lot of people here, you know, doing this dance as I'm flipping them back and forth. And at a certain point, it's going to become inevitable that there is going to be some crossing of the streams. And I am of the belief that they should, and they could, repeat the Guardian 05. Sorry, not the Guardian, but like the main class 05 and the off class 02, and not have an issue in the long term. Because I think so much of what you see on an investigator and to like derive uniqueness from them is right here and right here, right? It's the deck building, their signatures and their ability. I feel like that is like the deck building is obviously part of it, but at the same time, as the card pool gets bigger and bigger, mechanical identity in terms of individual investigators is going to get like the ability to be more unique. And I think that you have a good example with Wendy and Rita that they have very similar deck building, but are very different in the style of how they approach it. I think that's also even true for Jenny Barnes and Parallel Skids. And even throwing Preston in there. Preston is even different. These are three rogue investigators. Actually, like Preston and Skids are two good examples of their deck building is even more similar, right? Because he can get the Fortune and Gambit cards. Most Gambit cards are rogue, most Fortune cards are red. And that's something that you can do that's like, they're both, I think, play very differently while still being very similar to one another in terms of their deck building. Another good example is every Mystic, right? Like every Mystic kind of has that same sort of main class thing. This is part of the mechanical identity of the Mystic being so similar to one another, right? It's one of those things that I think is just like they're all like, I mean, Agnes, it's like I don't even know how to say it. But like Jim, for example, let's look at Jim and Jacqueline, because the person who said it earlier is that comparing the Dunwich investigators to the starter deck investigators is also very accurate, because they are very similar, right? Like Jim and Jacqueline want to play different games, right? I know they seem like they're both about token manipulation, and they kind of are, but Jacqueline is kind of just, I'm going to just take value from my first half, while Jim is like, I need to dig out my own value because my front half is a little bit more fragile for how things get done. Yeah, and then like you get these weird ones, which, I mean, like, I think the Edge of the Earth investigators, as much as they end up getting everybody with like, oh, I would love to play this card in Bob Jenkins, I do think that they should repeat the Edge of the Earth one, because I think that it is kind of neat, and it's like a more closed, it's like a more closed 0502, but still feels like you don't have that same restriction that the Dunwich investigators have. Which is neat, and I like that a little bit more. I feel like there's so much more I can do. Like, I think Lily Chen is the investigator that I've built the most with and had the most diversity in the decks I approach them with. And then like those same decks, like I wouldn't even consider doing them in Zoe because they're so much more limited. It's like, actually Zoe and Lily are two good examples to look at one another, right? I mean, Lily has, again, but this goes to my point that I was just saying, where what makes an investigator even more different is like this and this, right? All this stuff. And even like this no firearm assets is so like, it just like really changes things. And like they can like do the same sort of things where it's like book hater, you know, like Bill Watson, you know, book hater, and he gets like no tomes, right? Restrictions, no tomes, but like have the same deck building as Daisy. If they want to get even more like, this is not Daisy Walker, you don't get to F around like Daisy Walker does, right? Like they can do that kind of stuff more often. But with this one, it's like, I've built a few Zoe decks and Zoe's really cool, but like with Lily, she's basically kind of just Zoe, with a more restriction on her Guardian level zeros, but a more open on the splash, which means that there's just more things you can do with it, which I think is really good. And that's kind of like what it comes down to, is that a more open deck building is more exciting, right? I think my biggest pet peeve with modern deck building is it basically forces you to use Arkham DB. I don't get to pull out two sets of cards and vibe. I think that's true to an extent, where it's, if you're learning the game and you don't like have traits internalized, it's harder. But I don't use ArkMDB for like trait-based deck building unless it's like my first time looking at the trait. And then afterwards I kind of just get the idea, or like I internalize the ones that I actually want to play versus the ones I don't, right? I do have the benefit where I get to, you know, do this for a job. So I spend a lot of time looking at things in Arkham, so I'm not going to like say that it's easy to just internalize all that information and get it burnt inside of you. But at the same time, I don't want them to stop trait-based deck building, because I think trait-based deck building is incredibly interesting and incredibly good for investigators. It's my second favorite now. It might have been my most favorite in the past. But it's one of those things where trait-based deck building allows an investigator to grow. Not pointing at anyone in specific on this, but trait-based deck building is very good for an investigator because it allows them to get better in ways that are uniquely good to them, and also explore in kind of that more open feeling that those Dunwich investigators used to give back in the day that I don't think they give as much anymore, because it's actually part of the mechanical identity of the character. Charm for Amina. I mean, Amina's only been out for 2 sets. Amina's been only out for 2 sets. There's still time for her to grow, right? There's still time for her to go. And even if you can forget a couple cards that way, I mean, at the same time, like, good, right? Like if I forgot about the cards, they probably weren't good enough to play with, right? And then one day I'll see them and I'll be like, I'd like to play with that. And then I remember. It's like, it's one of those things where instead of like remembering every trait, you remember which investigator can play with that trait, right? Like, so instead of thinking like every tactic, I can play Mark Harrigan, go off the top of my head. Change it instead to when you see a tactic, think, do I want to play this in Mark Harrigan, right? And like that makes it a lot easier for you to work with. We can transition to talking about traits here, because I do think that is... Trait-based deck building has started to become how they are repeating deck building in a way that I don't think is particularly exciting. If you watch our channel a lot, you know that I'm let down by Hank Sampson, right? I'm let down by Hank Sampson's deck building because it's so like, if you don't know, Silas and Calvin, where are you? There you are. So Calvin has spirits 0 to 3, right? Which is less than Hank's 0 to 2. So Calvin has that in different than him. Silas is innate skill 0 to 2, which is what Hank gets. So like, in an effort to not repeat color pairs, they have just basically made like similar sort of things here. Like this is like, it's... Why the 35? I mean, I like that. I like the 35. I like the 35 deck building. But like, it's they just basically made like another... it's like too focused, and it makes it so that it's one of those things where it's less exciting than if this was just going to be a little bit more open and a little bit less of a repeat. I don't know if I'm articulating that particularly well, but there's just something about Hank that I feel like he is less exciting, because I feel like we've already actually like have seen him twice before. And like even investigators with similar stuff, like for example, Daniela Reyes and Will Yorick, two very similar investigators in play style and deck building, but they do play quite different from each other, right? And I mean, Hank Sampson is just another investigator that kind of lives in that space. Hank, I think, is an example of an investigator that I would like to see more restrictions on, like when we go back to the no firearms, or alternatively, no fortune cards. I would love it if they just kind of went a little bit nutty and were like, hey, no allies, right? It's one of those things where like, if this was just like, yeah, no allies, then it immediately gets you thinking. You're like, okay, we can put the deck size back to 30. What does that do to our boy Hank Sampson? How does that change things, right? Like where do we find our soak? How do we get that value? How do we design around that as designers? That I think is just like a little bit more interesting than just what we ended up getting from Hank Sampson, right? With that said, some spoilers for Drowned City. Marion does seem incredibly interesting, and I really like the deck building they have for Marion. I think that is really cool. It is very similar to like Gloria's style, but yeah, kind of more trade-based, which I think is really neat. If it is actually the truth, right? If it actually is, if people were remembering correctly from BusterCon. And like, that's the thing, right? Like, it's... Pointing to the video that I did where I initially thought Kate was our 2424 rogue, a seeker rogue, right? I think we can all agree that Kate's actual deck building is kind of flat, right? And like, how much more interesting would she be if she was just like Seeker 05, Rogue 02, no illicit cards, right? Like, how much more interesting do you think she would be? And I think the answer is immensely so. With that said, the new guy, Lucian Galloway, or whatever his name is, if he is the Seeker Rogue, I think he's going to do very good for that card pool. But it's like one of those things where I feel like some of this new trait-based focus is kind of there to make the investigators feel unique when they should close it up. Like, just give us like an 0502 with some restriction on it, right? And yes, I do think that the trait-based thing with like Kate in particular, and some of the other ones with Finn, where are you, my boy? There he is that their trait-based deck building remains too much in their main color. I agree with that as well. I think Kate is an unfortunate combination where both deck building and the front side are resident sleeper. I like her front side. I enjoy playing with her, actually. She's more exciting than I thought because you can kind of just do everything. I think Kate is better as a flex, and I wish she was like a 1-4-3-4 because I think she would have really popped off with that stat line. Let's talk about Finn, though. I think that's a good... We're just kind of jumping around. We don't have, like I said, this is a town hall, so we don't really have like a structure. We're kind of just going with it. Finn... okay, I'm gonna just say it. I don't buy the vibe that this was designed to balance against him. That they like, I don't buy that. I don't buy that vibe. That he was illicit 05, rogue 03. I don't know. I mean, I could be wrong. Like, I'm just a guy talking out my ass here, but I just feel like it was one of those things where it's like, we're going to do this to make him unique. And I think it's cool that he's unique this way, but then like they just like, every illicit card, they're like, oh, this actually just fits in a rogue, right? Same thing with Marie, right? Yes. Like, okay, I mean, buy is the wrong word, right? Like, I don't subscribe to that. But like you actually can look at them and they're very similar, right? They each give you an extra action that is dependent on something. And they were like, we need to make that weaker, right? Like, you can kind of just see potentially that thought line. But the reason I don't subscribe to it is because there's so many other investigators that give you an extra action that are also just, like, really strong, right? Like Will Yorick, right? Leo Anderson to an extent, right? Like, these are all just extra action investigators that don't have those same sort of weird restrictions to it. So I think it was more, for me personally, I subscribe to the belief more that these are, this was them to give a cool flavor, but I don't really think that it's kind of like the way that I don't know. I think it's ultimately leads it to be a little bit less boring in like the grand scheme of things, and I think there's a reason why we haven't seen more in this style of deck building, because it ultimately is a little bit more limiting. It does allow them to play with good stat lines, right? It does give them like nice stuff that you can play with here, but at the same time, like, other investigators have good stat lines, right? Like, other investigators like can do powerful things. Other investigators give good stat lines and also have have good abilities and really good deck building, right? So it's like, it seems a little bit weird. I do agree that Marie is more open because there are more spells outside of Mystics that you can do cool things with. But like, illicit is just like DOA, man. And I think the reason for that is just that when you design an illicit card, what class is it going to go into, right? And the answer to that is usually rogue, right? So I think Finn has kind of just been locked in that box from the get-go. Oh. With that said, though, I do think Finn's a good investigator. Like, I think Finn is very powerful. I think, like, the issue with Finn is not that they want him to be stronger, right? Is that they want him to be more interesting. Because I feel like at this point now, Finn is quite solved, right? Right? Like, Finn's pretty solved at this point, right? He only gets 5 splash cards, right? And then, like, you have Trish, who is just she has 0502, and some would argue a better ability, right? And I would be one of those people, right? Like it's kind of like that sort of thing. I think Finn has a lot of deck variety. Yeah, he has a lot of deck variety, but like I think at this point now he's pretty solved. Like, what does he do that gets him? Like, what are some new cards that we looked at that were like, this is what we want to pop off with Finn with, right? I think there's a lot of things you can do, and I think that 5 splash is viable in the same way that the Dunwich splash is, but like dirty fighting, I guess. Yeah, dirty fighting. So like with like every other rogue, pretty much. I've seen like Trish dirty fighting decks. Like that's the thing, right? Like Finn ain't even getting anything too exciting there, in like the grand scheme of things. And it's because there's just so many cards in his class that he just like doesn't like get a touch into. Thank God he gets Rogo 3, right? Like, you know. Just ran Dexter Dirty Fighting and it felt incredibly strong. I also just ran a Dexter Dirty Fighty deck for a video that I'm very excited to share with you all in the near future. But like, I think Finn has kind of like hit a relatively flat ceiling when it's come to power level. He has gotten like, and when I say this, I'm not saying that he hasn't gotten stronger, because every investigator in theory gets stronger when they get new cards in their pool. But you see, like, for example, like Mandy Thompson, who has just kind of been ignored because she was too strong when she first came out, and they don't make new cards for her anymore. So, like, while she's still getting those cards that are good in the Seeker class, she's not getting cards that are pushing her up in the same level that, for example, Grim Memoir did for Daisy, or even, like, Harvey Walters, right? And that's kind of like the issue when like you have that investigator that's not seeing those things that are like designed to help them out, you know? They got to work around her ability. No, I don't think they do. I think they should just make another. I think they should search. They should just let you search. It's like, I don't know, because like I think the taboo to 50 is really interesting, right? Yeah, and just give more search cards. Don't do the weird, what is it? What's Screaming Rex called? Captivating Discovery? Yeah. Yeah, it's like, and there's also like all that stuff that's like look and all that. It's just she has gone down in power. Like she's still very good, right? Like she's still very good. And if you play without the taboo, I think she is insanely good still. But like her card pool hasn't grown in the way that it has for other investigators. The reason why Daisy is so good is that she can play very well with a lot of cards, and she has an old book of lore, which is also just really good with her. And she can just like find, like her consistency is really good, but then she gets something like Grim Memoir, and like she's like, all right, now I'm also doing a Rex Murphy impression, right? And like you're also seeing it already with Gloria, right? We're also seeing it already with Gloria over here. And this is why ultimately I think that like, I'm sure the designers don't care what like, I mean, like, I'm sure they care what the community thinks, but like, I think that they like, it's one of those things where like, I'm of the opinion that a busted card is more exciting than a strong card, right? Because a busted card, like there's what are those things? The new plant, the scary plant. What's that card? I've only played with them once, and I've only played with the health version. The Myconid, yes, thank you. The Myconid. And you know what? Let's even fucking talk about the masks. Okay, we're pivoting a bit, folks. We're talking about different cards here. The Myconids. I have seen other content creators go frickin' haywire about these cards. And maybe I'm crazy, but I think they're fine. I think it's exactly what you're saying, Azure Sparrow. Strong cards with a good minigame are fun. Because if you... This is going to transition into the video we're going to be recording later today too. But I'm of the belief that if you're complaining that the player card pool is too strong, that's now a you problem. Like, until Fantasy Flight starts making official formats, which I think they should do, at this point now for a cooperative game, I think it falls onto your shoulders to build your own power level for a card pool, as opposed to... We're going really far away from deck building here. I should get back to deck building, shouldn't I, folks? But like, it's your job to ensure that your power level remains flat, as opposed to the designers designing the power level to be flat. They should have strong cards, and they should continue to design strong cards, especially when they are more interesting than other cards we've seen that are stronger in other ways, right? Brad, 77 months at the Golden Table. How's it going? I hope things have been going good, but thank you for your support. And I think that the Myconids are a good example of that. I think they're powerful, but I do think that they are... I think they're fun. I think the loop of them is really enjoyable. And if you want to, like, do the whole breach the door combo... No, breach door. Breach the door. If you want to do the breach the door combo with it, hell yeah. That's, like, why card games exist. If you want to do Ravenous Myconid breach the door, and you want to... do it every time, and you want to complain that this card is too strong, this combo is too strong, you need to like look inward and ask yourself why. Why are you doing this to yourself? Like, that's kind of like my thought process for it. And we saw it the same with the masks. There were people like saying these masks are going to break the game open. Turns out the masks are quite fair. They're really good one-ofs, right? They're really good one-ofs. I don't even put them in a lot of my decks. Like, I'll play Wolf Mask quite often. I don't even play Sparrow Mask as much as I thought I was going to. But I think the community was very up in arms about the Wolf Masks, and they shouldn't have been. But this is kind of the thing where... I like them making powerful cards. I would like it if these science cards were in other colors to work with, like, Kate Winthrop. Someone said, like, if we just had, like, a science gun, right? Like lightning gun. If that is... I mean, she can't play it even if it was, because for some reason she can only do level 4 science? Explain that? Explain that, somebody? Level 4 science? Like, I do think that, like, it'd be cool to see them also, especially because this new set is trait-based. Downloadable content. It's somewhere in here. Drowned City player card review. Boom. This isn't the place for you. We have these new specialized cards, right? I would love it if they kind of just looked at previous things as well, right? Well, level 5 science breaks are open. Is there even a level 5 science card? That's the thing, right? She's good enough at science to get level 5. Her experiments will not explode like they do in her weakness. I think that is a funny flavor example, but I don't think that is cool. I think, like, I'd rather her be like Seeker 04. Yeah, like what the frick? What the frick? You don't get. Finn only gets Illicit 05, Rogue 03, and she gets Seeker 05, Science, why I oughta. It's like, I just feel like it's, I don't know. I think it would be, once again, I think deck building should be what's open and most interesting, right? It should either be like open or like, you know, interesting. And I think that, again, restrictions breed creativity. And I would love to see more of stuff like this. Like no fortune cards. Like, who are all of our restrictions? We have no fortune cards. We have no firearms. We have no weapons. Cards level 1 to 5. Like, this is great deck building, right? Like, I think we can, I mean, it's too open in some ways, but like it fits so well for the character. And like, I don't know. I'm trying to abuse Breach the Door, Survival Instinct, the Rabbit, Smike, and Kate. Didn't work that well because there's truckload of setup. I didn't feel like the payoff was worth the XP and time. Yeah, no, it's, I could definitely get that, especially, but like, it's good that they allow us to do to attempt these power fantasies. And I think, like, going back to the idea of flattening the power level, it's one of those things that it doesn't allow people to do those broken things, or attempt to do those things that may not be broken, but they can dream them to be broken, right? Having a combo pop off is a point of card games. Exactly. And it's one of the 3 play styles that love it, right? Johnny's, the Brins. Like, the reason why Sled Dog. The reason why Bryn likes playing Sled Dog is more than just to annoy Travis, and albeit that is part of it. The reason why Bryn also enjoys Sled Dogs is because it's like, can I build around it? You know, can I actually make this work, right? It's also to annoy Justin. I don't get annoyed by it. I don't. If I'm playing games with like two of my like best friends, I don't care. You know, I'll do anything. Right? Like, what happened to my voice? I've lost it suddenly. Okay. Yeah, like I actually don't really get annoyed. Like, even in the video that came out today on our channel, when Travis is putting all those curse tokens in, I'm just happy to be playing Arkham with people. It's a lot more fun than playing Arkham by myself, even though Arkham by myself has been pretty fun lately. Okay, let's talk about Gimmick investigators taking good deck building, because I know that's something that people want me to probably talk about here, right? Preston Fairmont, Patrice Hathaway. Still cannot believe my blind playthrough of the Forgotten Angels with the Sled Dog deck, and it did really well. I can see it for 2 reasons. 1, the soak is really nice. 2, blind plays, you have extra power. You have extra power in the blind play. I don't know what it is, but it just makes you like really strong when you're playing a blind play. Patrice is fun. No, I think both of these investigators are very fun. I think they're both very fun. But I think both of these investigators, Tommy and Safina to an extent, I think less Tommy. I agree with Safina. I don't know if I agree with Tommy, but I do agree with Safina. You can someone make an argument against Leo that? I don't think so. I think you guys are just looking like you're building around one thing. I don't think they're gimmicks. I have built Leo decks around big guns and not allies, and it hasn't been an issue. Diana too? Diana's a good one. Yeah, Diana's a good one. I think these are all like, they're like so built around their game plan. Kelvin? Kelvin doesn't have an O2, though. That's also kind of like what I'm looking for here. I'm looking for these O2s. The Gimmick investigators that take a deck building. I think Diana is kind of the lesser extent. I think it's kind of like this, right? Like, these are the main ones, and then these are like the sub ones for this, right? Like, I think these two, it's one of those things where I think that this is another example of why I want them to repeat deck building that already exists, specifically the 0502, because I do think that Preston, definitely Preston, not so much Patrice, but at the same time, like, I know I've thought of decks where I was like, I want to play this card with this, but I can't because I then have to play a Patrice deck. I want to play like a Survivor with some Mystics and all that. And like, you can't do that unless you're Patrice, right? Like, if you want to do like the 0502 style, it's exactly that. Having the restriction on the deck building feels bad on the 0502. I think all four of these investigators are successfully designed investigators. I think they do great things. I think they continue to grow. I think they continue to improve. But especially for these two, I want them to exist again, not in their gimmick. Especially Rogue 05, Survivor 02, right? Like, it's just really unfortunate, I think, that it just feels bad. It just feels bad to have, like, the most open deck building be on a Gimmick investigator. And, like, Gimmick is not here to be slanderous. It's like they literally have a gimmick, right? Like, Amanda is literally a Gimmick investigator, right? Amanda is a Gimmick investigator. Carson is a Gimmick investigator. When we say Gimmick investigator, it means that, and like, even the people saying Kelvin, yes, Kelvin is a Gimmick investigator, right? They have to build around their thing to, like, they play the game differently than other people as the gimmick of their characters, right? If you can make their backside different, I wouldn't make their backside different. I mean, I could in the context of this video, but I think they're perfect, right? Like, I think they're perfect as they are. I think all of these four are perfect as they are. I just want, like, another front side to this kind of deck building. Because if you gave us a Rogue 05 Survivor 02 and he could play illicit cards, it'd be great, right? Yeah, because I think these are four very successfully designed investigators. I just want, like, it goes to my, like, this is one of the reasons why I have the opinion that I want to see them repeat deck building, because I think there's a lot of area to explore in that. And I think that is it for my talking points, but because this is Town Hall, chat, I'll take questions. Questions and comments, throw them on me. This is now this portion of the video. Because I think I talked about everything I wanted. The big thing is just that I feel like the Dunwich investigators haven't scaled well with the game, and I want more repeats, 0502, and less trade-focused deck building, because I feel like it's been a little bit too much lately. I wish Preston and Patrice had the Tony, Gloria, Carson type of deck building. I mean, I still think they can still use the 0502, but I do agree that the Tony, Gloria, Carson deck, Mandy deck building as well, is a really cool deck building style. Which edge of the earth is most awkward for you to deck build and root upgrades? Beep, beep, boop, boop. Easy, easy. It's Monterey Jack. Easy, easy. It's Monterey Jack and Bob, I think. But Bob is such an easy base that it gets started. I think it's MJ, right? I think it's Monterey. And then choose X are the weakest deck building because it tells you nothing about the character. I think that's a fair point, but I also think it tells you a lot about yourself because it allows you to be, it's very open for how you can approach it. Lily has a shit starter. I don't think so as much anymore. Now that she can just, like, get Runic Axe and, like, put XP into it right away. I also believed that Knife was playable in Lily Chen, and I think anyone who disagreed was too too stuck in their ways. They're not looking for growth. They're just like, knife bad. But now luckily she doesn't do that, has to do that anymore. So she can just play Runic Asks, right? So I think that like it's a lot better now. Putting a knife into Lily today, do it. Trust me, it's like actually not terrible. Superfang, man, he's given me so many legit deck building ideas that I would have scoffed at, but then like I just treated them seriously and I was like, this is actually sick as hell, right? What do you think about 03 or maybe 02, but with three colors, multi-colored deck building for future investigators? I'm for it. I'm for it. And I think like there should be like some sort of restriction to it where you can only have like a certain number of level 3 cards, but I think that's pretty sick. I'm personally super happy with using more trait-based deck building now that the collection is bigger. You know, I'm not I love trait-based deck building, but I don't like this kind of trait-based deck building or this kind of trait-based deck building. I think that it's not interesting. I just don't think it's interesting. I just don't. What do you think about the extra starting XP given to a few investigators? I think it's cool. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I know Travis doesn't like it that much. But like at the same time, it's cool. I think in the thick of it probably shouldn't exist. If we want to get into the nitty gritty, I think that's kind of the bigger issue. I think there's a big difference between starting at 5 and 8, right? To me, Hank's issue is not his deck building because it rocks in Silas. It's as boring as ability. Well, no, my issue is that his deck building rocks in Silas. And like, it's just like, it shouldn't be there. Right? Like it just shouldn't be there. It's like my issue with it. Because like Silas is the innate guy. Why does Hank have innate? It's just strange to me. Fearless is probably the answer to that question. Like just balance them more? I mean, I think that is a crazy logic to have. These investigators aren't I don't buy the balance needed. I don't buy that the 5 XP is for balance reasons. And I think that's actually like kind of a reductive thought process to have. I think it's just another notch, like another flick they can switch to give a character a bit more of a spice. And I think that's the only reason. Because like I think people just assumed that with Father Mateo, it was a balancing thing. But with Keimani, it's definitely not a balancing thing. I think it's just like something that gives Keimani a bit more of thing because they are going to be more action intensive than the others. So it allow you, I mean, that maybe sounds like I'm doing balance, but it's just like, it's kind of like one of those, all right, let's rephrase this because it did just sound like I was saying it for balance reasons. But it's like, it's not like that Keimani is weaker. It's just that they're like, because Keimani is very powerful, right? But they have such struggles starting up. I don't think they do. They have 5 foot. They have 5 foot. I think it's just like, once again, it's just a notch to flick for an investigator to give them a bit more spice. That's how I look at it. Honestly, as Zersparrow, this is the second time you said serial numbers filed off, and I don't understand that, so I'm just gonna not acknowledge it because I don't get it what you're talking about with that. It's you're sounding like a little bit too riled up for it, and I don't get it. Yeah, I think Valentine is right with this. The 5 XP give access to cards to leverage their ability early while not making these cards free for all investigators. So it sounds like balance, but it's the same in the same, like people complain. Okay, let's do this. I've got the thought here. The people who complain about this being the balance should then also be complaining that Mark has extra stat point, right? Because it's the same kind of thing. Like, honestly, I've removed a lot of people from my channel because of this, but I do feel like that a lot of people get mad at Keimani and blame the fine additional experience because Keimani is non-binary. And like, This is my first time actually saying that out loud, but I 100% think it's true. Because it's the same sort of thing with Mark Harrigan. The same sort of thing. Where like this guy gets an extra stamp point and people aren't complaining about that as being a balance thing, but with Keimani it's a problem. And I think that's kind of like the reason for that in some cases. Not every case! I'm not saying that all the time, but I do think that that is an issue. That does pop off. But it's the same sort of thing, right? Like it is for balance reasons, in the same way that the starter deck investigators get extra stat points, right? Like it's a flip switch that they can flip to make that thing work. I see what you're saying. What I mean by that is I'd rather than just repeat the class off class than try to do it but with traits. Yeah. I think that like trait-based deck building is when it feels like when you go to the 0-3 or for Mark's 0 because it is part of his balance thing. When it's just like slapped on, I do agree. It does feel a little bit haphazard. Right. How would you feel if Hank was just York's deck building, Justin? If he had a no ally restriction, I'd love it. If it was Hank, if it was Survivor 05, Guardian 02, restriction no ally assets, I'd love it. I think that would be really cool. Speaking about deck building, how about investigators like Min, Leo, Trish to a lesser extent, whose ability barely matters, but their deck building is so good that there are sick decks you can do with it. I think that's a great point, and it's why I want them to repeat kind of like 05s. Because like I do think that you could make this deck building is so good, Seeker 05, Survivor 02, that you can make another Seeker that's not skill based with that deck building, and it could pop off. But I think, like, yeah, like, I don't know. Like, Leo is incredible deck building. Guardian 05, Rogue 02 is incredible with guns. And I'm curious to see how this evolves, because the big guns has fallen to the wayside, and it's kind of like one of those things that I wish Leo could get another big gun, because I feel like he is also kind of stagnated a bit. But yeah, no, I love the investigators whose ability is kind of their card pool, right? Because it's like really good. I think like Agnes is a great example of a perfect investigator, because she does so much with her ability and her card pool, and they all sing together to a really good thing. I also love Leo. I had so much fun with him in 2023. I built like 6 Leo decks, and they were all just incredibly fun to play with. Like, then there was a time when I was playing 3 Leo decks at the same time. Blurred to get dirty fighting Leo, you could do it. That's the crazy thing. Like, Leo is just like, he's very versatile. He has like a Finn stat line without a Finn restriction, right? Hey, wait a minute. Wait a minute. Do I need to get mad again? Oh, let's go. That's a great question. Holy hell. Parallel Skids and Parallel Agnes both have an ability, their whole addition, the addition to their deck building, they can get extra copies of cards, but I don't really see this used too much. Was this a design failure, or did the community just not pick up on it? I think that is a great question, and I'm going to be a politician and say thank you for coming out here. I'm just formulating an answer in my head. I think a big reason is that I think the issue with Skids is that people see that 25 deck size, and he's like the best user of Underworld support, right? And while Underworld support is becoming more viable across the board, I think that it's still best used in Parallel Skids, right? So I think it's like one of those things where it's like just so hard to see the other one. Coupled with this, I think that parallel investigators are more likely to be played by Spikes than Timmies, because Timmies are usually probably not putting a deck on Arkham DB, right? And like same with Johnnies, I think that they're more likely to kind of also, I think, play around Underworld support, not to break it, but to like just get a weirder combo, right? I do think that Agnes Baker, the upgrade, is really nice. How does that work with Down the Rabbit Hole? No, it's instead, so it replaces it. It replaces it. Yeah, I think it does. And I think that's also kind of the issue. You know what? I think I'm now leaning kind of more towards not really a design mistake, but it's that both of these have a reason why you wouldn't want to do it. One is Underworld support, and the other is it doesn't synergize with Mystic upgrades, the Mystic upgrade permanents, which is a big reason that people play Mystic class to go through there. And I think you're also right, Carius, where there's a lack of good targets. It would be cool to have 4 Spectral Razors if the upgraded Spectral Razor means you don't need more of them. That's Carius's words, not mine, because I think it's very apt for that. One of my frustrations with deck building is when they throw an investigator with no valid support in their box. We had Mateo, they did the same with Rita, and now Wilson. Yeah, it is annoying. I think that it's unfortunate that there was a lot of, I think, fair criticism for Hemlock Vale, that the player cards kind of felt a bit disjointed. And I think a reason for that is that they needed to support these 2 investigators a bit too much, right? Can you not have multiple Luckies and Skids with Underworld support? Trace, don't get me started on that. Yes, it's you ask a different person, and the answer is different every person you ask. And I don't think there actually is a codified answer for it. But yeah, it's the unfortunate part of Hemlock Vale where both Kohaku and Alessandra had to eat so much of the box's support, especially on Alessandra's part. I'm a little bit less ornery about cards just having parlay for Alessandra. But I do think that unfortunately it did eat a lot into it, and it also unfortunately made the design of parlay cards a little bit warped, which is, it's a bummer. But I mean, I do think Alessandra's a fun investigator to play, so I think that's kind of sick. But yeah, so like I do agree that it sucks when they don't have support. With that said, I love Wilson Richards, and I think he's pretty powerful. I enjoyed the 2 decks I've played with him. 1 deck and 1 deck I built. My Sledgehammer Wilson deck was a great time. And the Travis's Clue deck was also really fun. Like, luckily with Wilson, it feels a little bit bad because you have the tools are so good, but like the Improvise and Upgrade really could use some more in that stuff, right? I also, like, I have no beef with the mix and matching of it, but I do feel like when you refer to the parallel, it's like the whole package, right? That's why, like, I don't have the other stuff here. It's like, I don't like to mix and match. I do like that the Monterey Jack is like the first one where I feel like it's warranted because the Edge of the Earth deck building is pretty restrictive while also being not bad. But I do kind of view them all as a full package. Parallel feels like it's too many options. It's hard to discuss them. That's why, yeah, again, to what I say, I only am talking about the full package. So, like, Parallel Rex is always this and that, right? Like, whenever I refer to them in the channel, and it's just like, I agree with Daniel that it just would be easier if there wasn't the ability to mix and match. But I understand why they did it, but I don't like it. The quality of Parallel is a little too inconsistent. I mean, I think that's pretty honestly expected for free release. Parallel investigators, I think, are designed more to be exploration of design space as opposed to being more tightly focused investigators. Like, they're more about the experience than they are the balance, so to speak. So I kind of give them a little bit more leeway with parallel investigators because they aren't actually real. Yeah. Oh, so I wish we had a canon investigator about attached to locations rather than a parallel. I do agree as well with that. I think they could still do it. I think they could also, I mean, like, we even just see with Marion, who I think is an incredibly designed investigator. Marion. Nowadays, they're designed to fill out the content route. I got crazy news for you. You want to know something that's gonna blow your mind? The designers probably also have a content route. They are probably unable to design certain things outside of the schedule that they're supposed to design things in. So they are probably also like, what can we do to have some fun here, right? And the answer to that is design different investigators so we also can have some fun designing outside of the structured release schedule that we need to follow. Because, like, the designers don't get to choose when stuff comes out. They get to design it, and then Fantasy Flight goes to Asmodee, and then Asmodee probably goes, all right, what's your schedule like, right? So the saying that they're for the content route is accurate, because it's also probably for the designers for them to do something when they are looking between times. But yeah, like, these two are very similar investigators, right? Incredibly similar. But they play incredibly different. And who would have thought, the thing I mentioned earlier, restrictions, they breed creativity, baby. The one fewer hand slot has flavor resonance. It's a really cool line of text to see, and immediately makes you think, okay, what can I do things? What can I do with this? I was hoping that she wasn't going to be able to play Bandolier. Just like, I would just love it. It says, like, deck building restrictions, no Bandolier. Unfortunately, if what is said for the deck building is accurate, and I'm pretty sure it is because it was someone who saw the deck size, the deck building, she can't do that. Once again, I like restrictions. They just make things, like, I think, immensely more interesting. What other slot restriction could work? I think no ally assets, I think, is the only other one, right? Just don't put Bandolier in here when you build her. No, I agree. No, like, it's very easy to do that. I think it's very easy, but I would love if it's one of those things where, like, have a designer double down and be like, I am so confident in the story I want to tell with this investigator that I'm putting this in you, right? So, like, yeah, like, it's very easy to not put Bandolier, but like I said, that was like a personal preference. If I could move a mountain, that's what I would want that card to say. But yeah, like, these are two very similar investigators, but there's just so many knobs that they can switch to make it work. And that's not even talking about deck building, which we can't look at her side because she doesn't have deck building yet. Oh yeah, like, I'm not saying playing Bandolier is gonna ruin the character. I'm just like, I would love it if a restriction was a restriction and not like a speed bump, right? That's kind of the thing, because, like, with Bandolier it's now a speed bump, and I'd rather it be a brick wall you can't drive through. But that's my personal preference. I'm not saying it's bad. It's just like, again, if I could have my way, I want that to be a brick wall. Like, I want you, if you're driving, and you try to get an extra hand slot, you crash and die. I do think, though, admittedly, Marion is going to be so event-focused that you're not even going to, like, probably ever want to do it in an optimal deck. But that is my dream. Likewise, Hank Sampson, his brick wall is no ally assets. In a perfect world, if I could do this. Okay. I think that's good. I think this is a good town hall. I think we got some good discussion here. If you want to have a town hall discussion in the future, let me know in the comments of the video or on our Discord channel, because I enjoy these. While they are a little bit less focused than I hope they be, I hope they would be, I do hope I at least got some sense out in what I was saying and I wasn't just a rambling madman. I know I'm a little bit of a rambling madman, but I hope it wasn't too crazy. Yeah, if you want to see more of these, let me know. Let me know topics. Otherwise, huge thank you to all of our patrons for supporting the channel and everyone who was here in the Twitch chat while I was recording this. You guys all rock. Have a great one. Thanks for watching. And as always, GG's.